In 2008, Barack Obama ran under the slogan, "Change we can believe in." He presented himself as a departure from his divisive predecessor. Writer, filmmaker and activist Tariq Ali has been manning the barricades against American presidents for over 40 years. He believes Obama represents no real change at all. This is his take of the week.
What the Vietnam War has done is that it has brought hundreds of new people into politics. People who, because of their attitude on the Vietnam War, have developed critiques of the establishment and state structures of their own societies, which make Vietnam possible, which will make future Vietnam possible.
One of the most striking things about Obama's period in office so far is the continuity with the Bush administration, not simply in terms of foreign policy, but in keeping a security state at home and carrying on with Guantanamo and the attacks on civil liberties and the economic policies. American liberals were drooling when Obama first entered the White House. Less so now. In Iraq, despite the promises, American troops are going to stay on the ground, confined probably to 6 huge military bases for eternity, or unless a new insurrection gets rid of them. In Afghanistan, Pakistan, the war has actually been escalated. Under Obama, there have been more drone attacks on Pakistan than there were in the preceding 5 years of the Bush administration. The recent attack on Libya shows an addiction to war that is extremely unhealthy, but once again marks continuities. Given that Obama's campaign had largely been funded by Wall Street, it was always an error to imagine that regulation was going to be the order of the day. Despite the financial crisis of 2008, which has wrecked the United States, the rich continue to prosper, the poor continue to suffer. Health reforms totally diluted and actually crafted by a lobbyist for the insurance company. Obama, like his predecessors, is in the embrace of the very rich who have been running the country for nearly 3 decades. The decision to take out Osama bin Laden by violating Pakistan's sovereignty, to execute him rather than capturing him and bringing him to trial, has done Obama's standing in a militaristic country a great deal of good, and he's hoping to be re-elected on that basis. But what it actually reveals is a deeper problem. What price democracy when both political parties operate in exactly the same way?
Tariq Ali, in the comfort of his North London home, joins us now in our cosy little Westminster home. Welcome, Tariq. Dan, let me come straight to you. Are you blinded by the symbolism of the colour of Mr. Obama's skin?
No, I think it's easy to talk, particularly if you live here in Britain, about Obama as if he had complete freedom of action. I mean, he's never had at any point. One of the reasons US presidents often turn to foreign policy presidents is because what they can do domestically is constrained by Congress. And the Republicans in Congress from day one refused to offer Obama anything, refused to vote for anything. I was as disappointed as you probably are that he didn't bring in a...
But his party controlled both houses.
Yeah, but there was... He squandered his majority.
Yeah, no, but you know, there was a big block of what they call blue dog Democrats, very right-wing Democrats, who wouldn't vote for healthcare reform, wouldn't vote for a whole number of things.
I don't buy this. I think one of the few occasions on which an American president has had a majority in Congress and Senate, and if his own party doesn't do what he says, he could have done what Roosevelt did, appeal directly to the people over their heads, which he didn't do. Or mobilize. I go to the United States. I spend more time in the United States than I do here, by the way.
As I think you do, you will have known that there was always a block of right-wing Democratic senators who would not support healthcare reform. They tried to get the best in.
But was blocked is just fantasy.
Obama had 60 senators
now when he doesn't have a majority, so he can rule precisely from where he's...
All right, okay. I'm glad you're getting on together. Michael, is Tariq right? Has Mr. Obama essentially continued George Bush's foreign policy?
Yes. I mean, let me give you one example. You mentioned Guantanamo Bay. Not many people know that George Bush let out more than 500 people from Guantanamo. Obama has let out hardly anybody. I mean, there are very good reasons why he hasn't closed Guantanamo. It's got 100 Yemenis in it. And who's going to let Yemenis out at the moment when Yemen has become the centre of terrorism? But it is an extraordinary fact that George Bush did much more to close Guantanamo than President Obama has
But he's
done.
got out of Iraq. He wants to get out of Afghanistan.
Yes.
He's been reluctant to get into Libya. That's different from Mr. Bush.
Well, I mean, the first two policies were already in train. The rundown in Iraq, the rundown in Afghanistan were obviously American objectives. In both cases, before there could be a rundown, there had to be a surge. And the surge in Afghanistan was mandated, of course, by Obama.
By Mr. Obama.
In the case of Libya, we don't know what George Bush would have done. But I think the Americans had very little political capital to spend on yet another intervention under either administration.
Policy. People cannot say that, I mean, Guantanamo is a disappointment, but people can't say they were shocked by Obama's foreign policy. He said that Iraq was the wrong war, he was going to double down in Afghanistan, and that if he had the opportunity, he would go into Pakistan and take out bin Laden. You might not like it, but it's not a disappointment. He was very clear
let me ask you
about
this,
that.
Tariq, on the differences with George Bush. Obviously, it's clear there is some continuity. I think it's hard to deny that at all. But it looks like he does want to get out of Afghanistan, and he does want to talk to the Taliban. Mr. Bush is unlikely to have done that. He's talked. We've seen Netanyahu in Washington. He's talked about Israel having to return to its 1967 borders.
Every single US president for the last 25 years has said exactly the same thing on Israel. It makes no difference at all. They all say the same thing, and the Israelis, depending on who's prime minister, play ball for a tiny bit or not. In the case of Netanyahu, not, despite the fact he got a huge standing ovation in
the joint session.
I mean, it was sort of sycophantic. On Afghanistan, to be fair, Bush was also talking to the Taliban. There have been behind-the-scenes negotiations with the Taliban going on for a long time. The question is, do either of them, Bush didn't, does Obama have an exit strategy?
Now, Diane, maybe the problem for you, we're in no doubt, and we were there the night he got elected, we're in no doubt that you love the man. But maybe in your heart of hearts, it is harder for you to love some of the policies. We've talked about Gitmo. There have been more drone attacks in Varistan, is it called, Tariq?
Waziristan.
Waziristan and the border areas, than many more than under Bush. And unemployment rate is still very high. Foreclosures are still at record levels. Living standards being squeezed.
He is as radical as you can be as a black man and get to be President of the United States. And it's easy for Tariq to be cynical. If you're one of those girls from Elizabeth Gowd Anderson Islington who went to Oxford with Michelle yesterday, tell them that it's just the same. Tell them nothing has changed. You're right. In some way, Obama has changed
Look,
nothing.
I don't,
but
hang
in
on,
other
Diane,
ways,
you go.
no, let me finish, Tariq. In some ways, he's changed nothing.
It's the same
But in
rifle.
other ways, he's changed everything. American politics will never be the same.
Tariq.
No, well, I think what he's changed is that the next time a black person is elected to the White House, there won't be too much excitement. And if we're talking about colour, I mean, there was the Republicans had Condoleezza Rice, they had Colin Powell. If you talk about colour, the Republicans had more black people in top places than the Democrats. You just don't like hearing it. Sorry, you judge someone on the basis of what they do, not on the basis of their colour.
And that's what they're being judged on.
Well,
and
that is why many of his own African-American supporters are now being very critical. Let me, Diane, if you're interested in African-Americans.
There's no point talking over each other. Tariq, and then I'll let Diane respond.
We have an astonishing figure at the present in the United States, that the number of African-Americans, young African-Americans, incarcerated in the prison system is exactly the same as the number of slaves in 1850 before the Civil War. Exactly the same. So having a black person in the White House is not going to change the systemic oppression of African Americans in that country, Obama or no Obama.
Okay, Diane.
And yet, his support remains strongest amongst African Americans, and that is because they understand better than you the constraints under which he operates.
I don't think we've even stated yet the real criticism of Obama, which is on the economic policy, which has been indecisive and ineffective. He began by saying that he was going to run a large deficit. He's now decided that he's going to run a much smaller deficit. So we've had a reversal of policy, but we have no explanation from him as to how he's going to reduce his deficit.
And I'll bet you it doesn't between now and election day.
No, he won't, because he refuses to cut spending and he refuses to raise taxes on anybody under 250,000 of income.
It would be fair to say that I don't think any American president would have got a rave review from you.
This is probably true, because I do judge them on the basis of their policies and not on the basis of their class or skin color. And to be an imperial president in the United States today, you do these things. But then let's not pretend that he's any different.
Were you comfortable with what many saw in effect was the assassination of Osama bin Laden?
You know me, I'm a rule of law girl, but it would have been a tricky thing to put handcuffs on him and take him back to New York to stand trial, basically.
Tricky thing, why?
Look.
You mean you're supporting no recourse to the law, people being targeted and knocked off wherever the American president wants, mimicking what the Israelis have been doing to the Palestinian leadership for ages.
You weren't there in the room with the US Navy SEALs. You don't know what was possible.
No, we saw.
To say they could have put.
Were you there?
Yeah, but you're assuming they could have just put handcuffs on him and marched him out. I somehow think that wasn't quite the way.
No, I think the reason he was killed was not because nothing else was possible in the room, but the idea of having him...
like you not to defend soldiers. Presumably, they felt that was the safest option.
If you let him finish, I think you hear he is defending the soldiers. Carry on.
No, I think the reason that the Americans did not want to capture Osama bin Laden alive was they did not want him in prison for 2 years. They didn't want eventually to have a death penalty. They didn't want all the opportunities for mobilization of anti-American feeling that would lead to an acts of terrorism. That's tricky.
Okay.
There's nothing tricky about putting the handcuffs on.
Okay, let me finish up with Tariq. I take the point about substance over symbolism, but sometimes symbolism does matter in democracy. And whatever you say and whatever your disagreements with his policies or your disappointment that he's not that different from what's gone before, he will forever be remembered as this man who got to the Oval Office the grandson of a Kenyan goat herder. That's quite remarkable.
No, it is. And I think the fact that you have a black family in a White House built by slaves is important and symbolic.
And it was built by slaves.
And it was built by slaves, but that's it. You know, the symbolism is now over. It's done. The next time it won't be so symbolic. Okay. And there will be a next time, no doubt.
Tariq, you have the final word, because if we let Diane have it, we'll be here all night. Thanks very much. Good to see you again back on our programme.